Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene. Oh my gosh. This dude is like a god historian. The personality in his structuring and the way he uses it to get his points across is just, it's almost mesmerizing. At some point, his idea in this book is revealing to us the causes of human behavior. Because if we understand this, we could see through the cover stories of manipulative, toxic people, but also see our more troubling emotions and how to realize it's just kind of a part of us, and how we're so much more mysterious and complex than we imagine. Since his notorious work, 48 Laws of Power, I've noticed that these traits of his as a writer are extremely consistent, and his ability to make them more relatable to the consumers of his material is improving sharply. That, and something probably just as important, ensuring that this brilliant man practiced his preachings and reports. He very clearly sets his intentions throughout the environment of his words. When I started listening to this earlier this year, I was like,
when the world needs this man most, this is the time that he comes to deliver, and he fucking delivers. He does.
Each chapter has the story of some iconic person, or persons who demonstrate the law, negatively or positively, and how to handle yourself effectively under the influence of the law. He does this so that we can actively transform human nature rather than simply exercise it. He says the potential for mayhem in human nature has only increased over time. I'd like to bounce off of this and add that while I agree, I think its confidence in self-presentation has only decreased as a result. This is a very, very bad thing. He's also quite the salesman. In the beginning chapter, he lays out all the wonderful benefits of having read or listened to this book. So much of it has to do with the intangible, the non-physical energies.
The forces, not the people.
The forces that the world is really controlled by. I think lately my reviews have been a little long. I'm gonna take a quicker approach to this one. Say some super quick thoughts about each chapter after listening to it. This book is like impossible to digest without taking like one step back at like so many different points and like looking at yourself objectively and assessing yourself and being like, oh shit, maybe I'm doing this. Robert Greene really is a master at what he does. I mean, you can almost see your irrationalities in life up close as he explains them to you from afar, pertaining to other people throughout history. He begins chapter 1 with a story of Pericles in Athens and how his rule of the city was like on fire, in a good way, obviously, because under his rule, everybody was just thinking the right way about things. But that's just what they thought. In reality, the only one who was really like rationally thinking was Pericles. Until he made one decision that basically fucked everything up bad, and then everyone lost their mind, and they were like, it's all his fault. They hated him, even after he died from it, which of course was also his fault. But once a leader led the city for decades and made one irrational decision, everyone went completely berserk. So Robert Greene explains how to not have your inner city go berserk, because when you do, you have a bad time. In fact, most bad times probably happen because we let our inner cities go berserk. This book is just full of too much valuable information. Every turn, corner, nook, and cranny is just drenched in like liquid gold. I think people will look in like 300 years at this guy's work as some of like the greatest in like 21st century study. Chapter 2 is about narcissism. A lot of these are basically flaws. Like why this book isn't called The Flaws of Human Nature, I don't really know. The only reason I could come up with is that it would sell more or less copies. He talks about the 4 different types of narcissism in this chapter, but humans are all narcissists. We are so narcissistic, and he explains why, and how, of course, in that chapter and all these other chapters. Chapter 3 is about body language, how a lot of the time when we talk to anyone, we actually tend to contradict ourselves. What we say is almost literally never entirely what we truly mean. And this is actually true. One of the greatest body language analysts, or I have no idea what to call them, or one of the greatest psychologists of his time, Milton Erickson. He was like paralyzed and blind, and he became so obsessed with all the little qualities and details of human behavior. He could tell a woman was having an affair based on the way that she walked into his office and the way she crossed her legs while sitting in the chair in front of him. The point of this chapter is to emphasize the importance of seeing through the masks that we put on ourselves every day, just for each other. Chapter 4 is about recognizing the patterns of our faults, and it's about Howard Hughes. He took his father's tool company, and I think another company, and had other people scale those. And he tried and failed a bunch of other ventures. His mother had no other children, and basically anxiously paid all her attention to him. His father owned the tool company and had a really high standard of him to be successful. And he never realized the toll that this took on his life until later on, when it was too late. Greene, the author, talks about the character signs, I think the 10 different toxic character types. One of them I heard and I was like, this sounds a little bit like me. It's called the perfectionist, the hyper-perfectionist. Ironically, I don't think it's a perfect description. Coco Chanel is talked about in chapter 5, about the company's rise and fall, to the rebound and beyond. There's a whole thing about why the clothes have sold for so long and the DNA of their brand. This is like a seductive fantasy, it's like a desire, it's like a mystery. She basically used the idea of dangling something that someone else wants in front of them to lure them into buying her clothes. And the whole idea came from something that happened throughout her childhood, which is talked about in the book. Chapter 6 is the law of short-sightedness. And it tells the story of King George, and of course, the fucking stock market. Some things to consider that can make you a little bit less short-sighted in the future, and a bit more strategic about sticking to your goals. Chapter 7, which I found really inspiring, is about Lyndon Johnson and his experience in the Senate, and how quickly he was able to persuade everyone into his own way and just winning them over. He utilized his strengths. He was not much of a public speaker. He was more of a one-on-one guy. So he used that to his advantage, and he conquered the whole thing in like a quarter of the amount of time. It took all the old-timers to do it, for lack of a better word. And I think this chapter really states the differences between persuading somebody and manipulating them. It's like softening the resistance of other people by confirming their self-opinions. If this is manipulation and they dislike how the result happened, but they really like the result, I don't know, man. I mean, there has to be a reason these things are so effective. But again, that's kind of just the way of human nature. The next chapter is about the ultimate freedom, as Greene calls it. The life of a writer in the 1800s named Anton Chekhov, and how it went from bad to good to great to shit to great. And a lot of the greatest parts in it had a lot to do with a conscious change of attitude. Then the author reveals, of course, 5 different types of constricted attitude, and a lot of things about each one. Something this book gave me the impression, one I also vaguely got out of How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, is that a lot of people are really kind of hopeless. They have no hope. I mean, they do, but there is so little a point, especially in a year like 2019, in even putting your energy toward changing their viewpoints, because their viewpoints are so constricted and negative and limiting that they end up being the main influence of the reason that you don't go anywhere. And in fact, they might be the reason you go backwards, if anything at all. Chapter 9 is about the dark side and how we all have one, and the traits of it, and it tells the story of Nixon and why he resigned. And of course, it offers strategies and solutions and steps of becoming what he calls the integrated human, like Steve Jobs or Einstein. Realizing that you have a dark side is only half the battle in this sense. Chapter 10 is about fatal friends, and it's just a long story about 2 different friends, and it's all about how their life got turned upside down. And no, honestly, there's so much drama in this one. It almost hurt to listen to the amount of shit that happened in this chapter. So much shit went down. But in the interpretation and understand sections of this law, Robert Greene offers a fascinating analysis on the emotion of envy. What I like about how he does these understandings and interpretations is how deep he goes into the causes of all of them. Chapter 11 is Knowing Your Limits, about the story of Michael Eisner, the CEO of Disney from 1984 to 2005. His power trip of grandiosity that he got from his sense of importance and the feedback of his work in Disney from the earlier years really fucked him up, and he ultimately resigned like half the other people in these chapters who weren't executed. Everything else about this, of course, is in the book. Chapter 12 is about genders, and this is just like, it's just remarkable. If anyone wants my take on the whole gender politics thing, what's equal, what isn't, why, etc., I will say what he's saying. Chapter 13 is about Martin Luther King Jr., and I found this one really inspiring. And it's about the inner voice that he used to kind of guide him through the tough times with all the shit that people threw at him. I am super passionate about this voice because I oscillate in and out of listening to it myself in my mission in life and work. Chapters like these are usually my favorite in just about any book, so long as they have to do with some sort of a higher purpose that we are meant to sort of hold ourselves up to. Robert Greene says, "This feeling of being lost and confused isn't anyone's fault. It is a natural reaction to being born in times of great change and chaos." I live for things like, for shit like that I hear in these books. It makes me so happy that people even realize anything like this is happening. To me, the absolute most fascinating thing about this book is how Robert Greene, he shoots us these stories, analyses, and then these explanations as if he is some sort of a life coach. And anytime you're encountering these problems in your own life, you can coach yourself using the insights he's gained from probably like several decades of research into the most of the most and the many rhythms of history. So in that sense, this is almost like a history book disguised as like a self-help book. In that sense, it's a lot like his other ones, but I think that is what makes him so unique as a historian. Chapter 14 is all about the downward pulls of group efforts and how to resist them. The story he tells in this chapter is so absurd. So much shit happens in it. I don't remember everything. I do remember it involving communism, anarchy, cult-like behavior, schools, a handful of friends, and a couple suicides as well. Chapter 15 is about Queen Elizabeth of England. If I were a girl, because I don't know if I've listened to the biography of, a woman in history yet. However, the Warren Buffett bio was written by one, and very well done at that. If I were a girl and looking to get into politics especially, I would be studying the shit out of people like Queen Elizabeth. Wow, she was
Gangster. She was really gangster.
Chapter 16 is about John D. Rockefeller Sr. I listened to his bio earlier this year, and it was one of the filthiest bios ever. Probably like in my top 5 that I've ever listened to. I spent most of listening to this chapter with just such a sincere like grin on my face. Because there are traits of his personality that I kind of see in myself, but there are also traits of his personality that he had, but I don't have them and I really want them. I have just found that it's impossible to listen to this book without learning new things about myself every listen. Chapter 17 is about the execution that happened to King Louis XVI in France involving a huge revolution, and how the same thing happened to the very leader of that revolution. They ended up getting executed. The chapter is based on myopia and, generational disagreements and shifts and all these different changes. And of course, right after that, there's some sort of like a self-analysis of, how can I utilize the changes of what's happening in my generation right now to the better advantage of myself and the world. The last chapter, I don't know why I originally thought there were 22. There were just 18. But it's about mortality and beautiful philosophy that Robert Greene has proposed on death. It talks about this writer. Her father died of a couple diseases, and she did what he wanted her to do. She's got into writing. She got so good at it. But shortly after she got amazing at it, she contracted the same virus. And all the people that she positively influenced, she was doing it while she was dying. So it reinforced the whole death is mere transition notion that I've heard in plenty of other books. But it's all just really well written. This is a phenomenal book. Like everything else Robert Greene puts out. And I seriously enjoyed it. Quotes, "Man will only become better when you make him see what he is like. Our fear is not the enemy's strategy, but our own mistakes. Yes, people are irrational, but so are you. They are the only ones who can solve the problems they create," referring to narcissists. People are like the moon. They rarely show you both sides. If you want to test a man's character, give him power. With an elevated perspective, you will have the patience and clarity to reach almost any objective. In many ways, we are defined by our relationship with time. The years teach much, which the days will never know. Never get discouraged, never be petty. Always remember, others may hate you, but those who hate you don't win unless you hate them. And then you destroy yourself. Our whole being is nothing but a fight against the dark forces within ourselves. You can throw out nature with a pitchfork, but she'll always come back. The deeper the repression, the greater the volatility of the shadow. Every time a friend succeeds, I die a little. What is the most virile, I don't fucking know how to pronounce this, I don't remember, in men is something feminine. What is most beautiful in women is masculine. Only when we are alone or in down moments do we actually experience the chronic boredom that motivates our actions and eats away at us. Man would rather have void as purpose than to be void of purpose. A thing turns into its opposite if pushed too far. When people are free to do what they want, they usually imitate each other. The frivolity and boredom which unsettled the established order, the vague foreboding of something unknown, these are the heralds of approaching change. Premeditation of death is premeditation of freedom. He who has learned how to die has unlearned how to be a slave. Direction 1. I recommend this book if you are just so curious about other people and yourself. If you want to know more about how people work and how people think and how people act and all this other stuff and why, and what makes them tick. Or if you want to know things about people that they don't even know about themselves. Direction 2. If you like this book, I recommend, I don't know, man. I mean, this dude is just amazing. Anything by Robert Greene, honestly. I've checked out at least 4 of his other books. They're all phenomenal. I think my favorite, maybe behind this one, was Mastery, and the 48 Laws of Power being a close second. The Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene. There's a link in the description if you guys want to check it out and read the reviews. That and all of the other books I mentioned in this video. If there are any other books you guys want me to check out and review, please let me know in the comments below. Also, let me know in the comments below if you checked out this book and you liked it. But hey, make sure to smash that like button if you haven't already. Subscribe if you haven't already, because I don't know why someone would watch this far into the video and not subscribe. And if you want to join the notification squad and turn on that little bell to receive a notification every time I drop a new video, that would mean the world to me. Thank you guys so much for watching. You can find me everywhere, and I will see you then.